I am thoroughly satisfied. You know, something weird happened the other day. I was playing the Resi 4 remake demo and having a great time when halfway through the village fight it hit me. I'm feeling exhilarated. I got zombies closing in, ducking between buildings, having to tap flanking foes in the head for a quick roundhouse, taking the occasional glance at my ammo, and I suddenly thought to myself, man, I really don't want to get killed here. Why did I say that to myself? I mean, I get into situations like this all the time in video games. Baddies on all sides, knee-deep in hell sort of thing. But most of the time, I'm not worried about dying or running out of ammo or playing super tactically. Why am I doing it now? Well, the obvious answer is the mechanics, and that's true, but this feeling only shows up for a handful of titles I played, and there are plenty which try to do it and end up failing. Games where you're worried about item conservation and taking on enemies are almost a dime a dozen nowadays, but they all fail to elicit that feeling, even at their hardest difficulties. In particular, I thought back to my old Last of Us playthroughs, how uninteresting they actually were because failure in that game was frustrating and success was boring. How could these two games who are going for a generally similar feeling come out so different? And then it hit me. Resident Evil 4 presents challenges because they want you to have fun. The Last of Us presents challenges because it's a formality. Perhaps the biggest difference between these titles is their enemies, the variety of which is skewed heavily in Resident Evil's favor. The Ganados alone come equipped with like 20 different weapons, which escalate in power as the game goes on, culminating in fucking miniguns of all things. The closest equivalent for The Last of Us is hard to pick, though. I mean, on one hand, humans have a variety of weapons, while normal zombies are, zombies. Neither comparison, though, feels accurate, does it? Why is that? Well, for one, Ganados don't fight like either group. Humans, assuming you even get into a fight with them instead of using stealth, which I'll get to in a second, are fairly basic opponents who aren't that hard to kill. The difficulty comes in that Joel's aim is awful. You missed most shots not because you missed, but because Joel can't keep his weapon on target.
You missed that one.
Or your ammo supply is low because of bad, arbitrary ammo scarcity. Running zombies, on the other hand, are even more brain dead, and I mean that both literally and figuratively. They tend to just run at you, which makes them fucking cannon fodder half the time, even if they do outnumber you. In general, they're really just a chore to take out, and when you add stealth into the mix, they become even more impotent. The only reason they can be dangerous is that Joel sucks at aiming, so you might not hit them good enough to kill them really quick. But you have your overpowered melee to back you up if that's the case. Human enemies aren't much better. They have a more diverse set of attack patterns for sure. Their AI is better and they tend to be more dynamic, but they're rarely threatening even if you're outnumbered by so much. The fact is that all the decent weapons and AI in the world cannot stop a player who has any reasonable amount of skill, and killing them doesn't yield any rewards aside from punishing you and your supply pool. A trait shared by the worst foes in the game. I'm gonna level with you. Clickers and bloaters are just not fun to fight. There, I said it, it's true. Both have arbitrary insta-kills, coupled with how fucking tanky they are. Stealth barely helps because you have to use shivs on clickers or shoot them with a bow, and their headshot hitbox always felt really off to me. I don't know if that's the case for other people. Bloaters, at least, are bosses by design. They're supposed to be damage sponges. And they aren't really as annoying to fight as clickers, but they also don't show up as much as clickers, so... Meanwhile, in Resident Evil 4, you have the wonderful Ganados. Slow zombies wielding all kinds of stuff, making up for their speed with durability and numbers. There's always a ton of Ganados, and their various weapons present several challenges for the player. Each weapon has its own range, wind-up, damage. They can throw their weapons, throw dynamite, shoot arrows, and of course there's the chainsaw. There's also tons of other foes. Dogs that try to chomp you, bugs that try to stir-fry you, sharp armed men who want to skewer you, and of course the regenerators. They make up a sizable roster of foes, all with their own quirks and challenges, though for the most part the focus is still on the Ganados. Fighting Ganados, though, isn't a chore like in The Last of Us, though, because taking them on is baked into the DNA of the entire title, especially in its relationship with... Resource management is the name of the game for lots of survival horror titles, aside from survival and horror. You gotta make use of what you got without screwing yourself over. It's very compelling in a lot of titles. Resident Evil 4 and The Last of Us part ways, though, is their fundamental view on resource management itself. In The Last of Us, getting into fights and losing resources is a punishment for bad play, But if you're playing well, then you're either not using any resources at all, which defeats the point of giving you any to begin with, or using them so efficiently that the risk of running out is almost non-existent. The resources themselves barely matter, mostly because stealth breaks the game and makes it so conservation is a cakewalk, before turning around and forcing you to use them in a shitty, scripted fight, or literally halting gameplay until you get into a fight. Either way, you don't really get anything out of not using them aside from just having more ammo or something. And even if you did run out of ammo, the game is kind enough to drop some when you kill an enemy to make sure you're not totally out of shots. Meanwhile, in Resident Evil 4, using items is a punishment, but the range of severity for using items is much wider, even on professional. This is because using resources like ammo is actually encouraged, since it saves you resources in the long run, and they do that by letting you do this! Kicking ass like a kung fu master. Not exactly scary, I know, but it adds a whole new dimension to the gameplay. Good Resident Evil 4 gameplay doesn't force the player to use resources. In fact, it's much the opposite. You use what you have to set up attacks that will save you resources in the long run. In essence, the way you save resources is to play the game in the most exciting and at times risky way possible. In The Last of Us, there's no real risk in stealth gameplay. You can take out all the guys in an area and the game is, well, pretty easy. Especially since stealth is just this really basic line-of-sight stealth, and some of the easiest I've ever encountered in any video game ever, but that's besides the point. When you play efficiently in Resident Evil 4, it actually requires you to take some risks. It requires you to aim your shots well and get your kicks in where you can without taking too much damage. In essence, you're putting your health resources on the line to save your combat resources. I, as the player, need to use the right weapon at the right time against the right foe to make sure I'm not wasting anything. And to top it all off, when I do it right, I'm treated to a satisfying kick or suplex with all the viscera I can ask for. By 2004 standards, at least. I'm happy to say that the remake has held on to these ideas. You want to smack as many guys as you can with a kick so you can damage them on the ground. You want to position yourself and the enemy in places where you could do the most damage. It's fun and exhilarating at the same time, knowing that if I mess up I'd get fucking eviscerated by these crazy Spaniards. The game throws a whole lot of shit at you and says, "You're gonna survive, boy." And you want to, though, because surviving is fun. It's exciting to feel like a badass, dodging attacks and weaving your little pistol shots in where you can. Part of that, though, is really thanks to the...
Sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
Resident Evil 4 is supposed to be scary, apparently, but it's not. It's fucking funny. Practically a comedy at times.
Since you're here, why don't I introduce you to it? It should keep you busy.
Can't remember the name, huh? A senior moment, perhaps.
I've been expecting you, my brethren.
No thanks, bro.
I'm sure you boys didn't just tag along so we could sing Kumbaya together at some Boy Scout bonfire.
Just because you killed my small-time subordinate.
Sadler, you're small time.
This translates into the gameplay, into the form of those silly kicks and stuff, but the seriousness of the general plot or setting never really loses anything because of it. Leon's not cracking bad jokes when Ashley's life is on the line, or when he's getting decapitated. The Ganados all speak Spanish and having lots of fun lines to tell you what's going on, even if you don't really speak Spanish. It's fun to know that they're saying something but you just can't make it out on account of your sloth and ignorance. And what words you can make out are actually pretty cool and helpful, in particular the "behind you, imbecile" line to let you know you're getting flanked. To sum it up, I'd call the tone mid-2000s but not edgy. An important distinction, given the alternative to that is... The Last of Us, meanwhile, is hyper-serious, and that's not actually a bad thing. Its tone is serious because the plot itself is serious, and very personal. It's about Joel and Ellie, and it's the best part of the game for sure. But at the same time, that tone has an effect on the gameplay. If Joel and Ellie are taking all this that seriously, then chances are you're going to as well, even if you don't want to. Now you're not fighting because it's a fun video game, you're fighting because the story obligates you to do so. And again, that's not technically bad, but that tone means that the whole "I'm enjoying this, I'm having fun, I am feeling exhilarated, this experience I'm having with the game is great," is just not present in the same way, and it's compounded by the other design choices mentioned before. In an ironic turn, Resident Evil 4 not taking itself that seriously makes it easier for the player to get invested, in part because its overly fictitious nature encourages the player to have some fun. If you're invested in the fun parts, then by proxy you'll get invested in the exciting parts, the spooky parts, the stupid parts, and yeah, even the bad parts. You won't question why there's a little French guy lording over a castle in Spain, or why this massive wheeled contraption in the basement of said castle is here, or why Leon learned how to do a WWE suplex as part of his Secret Service training. It's just all part of the experience. The same thing happens when you play a Metal Gear game, or Ace Combat, or really any Suda51 game ever. You just roll with it, and when you do, you find that it's just as compelling, if not more so, than anything trying to actually be serious. With any luck, 4's remake will be just as good as the demo had us believe, and I'm sure The Last of Us is going to do great, courtesy of that show everyone won't shut up about. But I think it's a real shame the direction games are going like this. The Last of Us, for 2013 at least, was a great game, featuring a narrative that was exceptionally compelling. Surrounding it was a game of varying quality, but had potential to be expanded upon. Unfortunately, more and more games are taking the gameplay parts of them and turning them into a chore. A box to be checked before the next high-budget cutscene of two characters talking about their feelings. You know, in Resident Evil 4 there's a scene where two characters talk about their feelings. It's fucking ludicrous.
As expected. After all, you and I both know where we come from. Oh, I needed her to buy Sadler's trusted me. Like you, I'm American.
And it has awful quick-time events, a trait ironically shared with The Last of Us, but that's besides the point. However, all this pales in comparison to one massive difference. One that few designers actually pay attention to, and one that frankly keeps Resident Evil 4 as good as it is for years and years and years and years and years, and why they're remaking it in years and years, and why I will keep playing it forever. One of the most fundamental laws of game design is the idea that one aspect of a game will have an impact on every other part of that game. When we judge video games, we first look at the hard factors of the design, stuff like graphics or gameplay or whatever. And then after that, we look at the soft factors, the particulars of the design. Behind all this is the need for such factors to meld together and account for each other so that they create an experience that's actually worthwhile. And this is something that many games really struggle with, especially in the modern era. In the case of Resident Evil 4, what on the surface seems like a conflicting set of design principles and tones ends up working really well because it's all accounted for in the grand design. Ganados on their own would be decent foes to fight, but adding to that a simple resource system regarding ammo and healing, including big melee hits and the shockingly skill-expressive knife to deepen player mastery, and much, much more, the game ends up working wonderfully. There's a reason Resident Evil 4 redefined third-person games that came after it. The game worked that well and felt that good to play. The Last of Us sort of done the same thing, but it failed to sync up the gameplay with the rest of the design the way Resident Evil 4 did. The gameplay's violent, but not particularly difficult, even ungrounded. Joel comes off like a one-man army despite the game leaning on being a down-on-your-luck survival type adventure. Resources are limited unless you're the enemy, in which case you have unlimited ammo and your weapons are all ID tagged, so Joel can't pick. You're meant to be conserving your resources, but that's mostly done through the easy as hell stealth, which makes the whole situation pathetic. What does this all mean for The Last of Us gameplay? It makes it feel shallow, less interesting. There's little to master in terms of skill expression, which could have been used as part of the gameplay loop for conserving resources. But regardless, games have started taking after The Last of Us because of its story. These games end up emulating that same lack of sync between the gameplay and the rest of the design. Look at games like Horizon Zero Dawn or the new God of War titles, sacrificing especially challenging, interesting, or skill-expressive gameplay that could be integrated with a story or setting, instead of leaving them as something more like a chore, especially when there's lots of simple changes they can make to have their gameplay feel better. Imagine God of War if all they did was just pull the camera back and let the controls kind of float a little better, you know? There's a lot more that could be said, and to be honest, comparing the games isn't that fair since they're still very different from each other. But that feeling I got from Resident Evil 4, the excitement of the danger which resulted from how many shots I had, the positioning of weapons of the enemy, the feeling of the world bearing down on you and you just gotta karate kick your way out like a badass. That feeling just isn't replicated anymore. I'm shocked that the remake managed to retain it, frankly, or that Village managed to elicit the same feeling when I played it the first time it came out. I'd like to hope that other games could learn from Resident Evil 4, but aside from Dead Space, basically nothing makes that attempt. Gameplay considerations remain in the background for so many titles, and I somehow doubt it's going to get much better. With any luck it will, but I wouldn't hold my breath. It's a shame for sure, but what can you do, aside from not buy them, stop buying them, stop buying these games? For me though, I think that's been enough. I got a president's daughter to save, bingo to play, and big cheeses to fry.
Monsters. Guess after this, there'll be one less to worry about.
What a sorry state we're in.